We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is hard and we're willing to.
In February of 2020, Auto Trader, a prominent UK automobile magazine, published a report using what's called the intersections methodology, or looking for the collision of macro trends driven by technology with major pressure points offsetting the market. Tom Cheesewright, who, by the way, just has about the most British name in the history of British names, I love it, is working to predict and prepare for our future world. He's one of the world's first applied futurists, consulting and speaking on the technology of tomorrow, today. So, as is my specialty, let's rip off his hard work, throw some pretty graphics on it, and call it a For the Future's production. Of course, for legal reasons, I'm joking. This is a independent creative project that is properly citing sources to evaluate and determine an independent theme. Now that that's out of the way, what will the car of the future even look like? And before I roll the intro, if it's any trouble to you, we'd really appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. It helps us not only understand what kind of content you guys like, but it also helps with the YouTube algorithm. Thanks. First, a quick overview, and then we'll break down each segment one at a time. The first decade we'll look at is 2020 to 2030, and it's been laid out entirely by Tom Cheesewright as, quote, the last decade of the combustion engine. This is quite a statement. 2030 to 2040 is the so-called electric decade, and then 2040 to 2050 is the self-driving decade and the interconnectability decade. But to start off, let's go back to 2020 to 2030, the upcoming decade. And boy, it's going to be an intense decade. There's a lot of quick change coming, and especially due to the stagnation of the auto industry over the last century, it'll be turbulent to say the least. First, gas power or petrol power, depending on where you live, will quickly be squeezed as electric vehicles are set to dominate all statistical measurements by 2030. Really, this is already happening too. In 2018, alternatively fueled vehicles, or AFV for short, were just at 1.7% of total vehicle usage. Then, just a year later, in late 2019, we saw as AFVs begin to control the market, now taking up roughly 9.9% of all vehicles. With this being said, even at that new rate, in under a decade, the majority of cars on the road will still continue to use internal combustion as their drivetrain. Just some food for thought. Next, as laid out by Auto Trader UK and Tom Cheesewright, again, what a name, battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, what's up with the automobile reports and acronyms, good lord, will quickly advance to the forefront of safety, comfort, speed, and range, as previously mentioned, all statistical categories. And this is mostly due to massive scaling projects both in North America and across Europe, driving innovations in both material and hardware, such as tire and wheel technologies. And while yes, the technology is advancing at a rapid pace, few not as often talked about issues with an increase in dependence on electric batteries need to be discussed. First, parking garages. Think about it. You're a civil engineer working to upgrade the infrastructure of your nearby cities. Thousands of cars needing to be parked in high garages now also need to be charged while they're parked in order to successfully transport their owner home. And this is just a single issue with very specific population centers. There's certainly thousands more on the horizon. So then, an appropriate question is, what exactly is the car of 2030? A decade from now in 2021. First, some boring things. As materials such as carbon fiber and complex next-generation plastics become cheaper and easier to produce, weight will fall and ranges will rise, meaning tires will last longer, along with time in between services, such as oil changes or just regular maintenance with engines. Also assisted by programs such as Tesla's nighttime software update program, meaning we'll begin to service and upgrade our cars in a software perspective instead of a hardware perspective as previously done. And so Big Brother, or rather little just learning to drive brother, is the world of 2030 automobile automation. In my opinion, we'll probably see a very similar rollout to how features such as lane control or heated seats have seen a luxury to economy rollout in recent years. Meaning at first it will be a luxury item, even possibly an add-on to six-figure cars, so an ultra luxury item. Then as the tech gets cheaper, it'll become equitably or evenly available. Next, we arrive in the decade spanning 2030 to 2040, or what I like to call the green decade and Auto Trader names as the electric decade. I guess we'll just have to see who's right. And things are starting to get crazy in this decade, so prepare. First so-called lounge cars are on their way according to Cheesewright, meaning that with second-gen, fully automated vehicles arriving in force, we will be looking to much more airplane-like cabins instead of car-like cabins, offering a more round-the-dinner table approach instead of four seats facing the same direction driving forward kind of approach. And the full automation is hypothesized to fully set in around 2040, along with one far larger shift. Nations, especially Western democracies, will begin to buy back gasoline cars, or give subsidies at least to heavily suggest a move to electric power. That is, if the government even wants cars at all. As cities in America look towards the future decades, an emphasis on decongestion and a green new lifestyle will emerge, transforming most city centers into mostly walking and public transport centers only. Cheesewright and Auto Trader predict a move to car ownership being a near retirement shift, something people will need as they move out of densely populated zones instead of a beginning of adult life purchase. But to the car of 2040 and the previously mentioned lounge cars, they will surely begin to look much more like, as said, a first-class airplane cabin rather than a traditional economy car of today. And finally, we reach the last decade research by Auto Trader, 2040 to 2050. And this is really where we begin to see the modern car finally fizzle out. In this decade, full automation will dominate most streets. A striking change, this will lead to the transition from public cars being very common to nearly unheard of. Cheesewright predicts a shift to subscription services, a sort of next generation Uber basically. And alongside these subscription services, personalization will become virtual, with the advancement of materials allowing for things like virtual paint, branding, etc. And admittedly, as someone who has a relative interest in the gaming world, I can already imagine the microtransactions. But like many buses today, this so-called case model, connected, autonomous, shared, and electric vehicles will lead to cars existing as AI-driven fleets acting in the place of both private and public car options today. And with the capacity for this to produce both more social interaction and less personal freedom, it is certainly a complicated, convoluted outlook. So let me know, how do you feel about this? Are cars truly going to change this quickly? And if you think they will, are you okay with it? It's a lot after all. And for the future of us all, we better get educated and find solutions.